Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into the world of high finance. Picture this, it's the 19th century. Think top hats, monocles, and enough facial hair to make a lumberjack blush. This was a time when America was transitioning from a bunch of farmers to a nation with factories. And you know what factories need? Money, lots of it. Enter the big players of the financial world, the robber barons. And behind every great fortune, there's a great banker. And that's where our story really begins. Our story starts with Junius Spencer Morgan. Junius wasn't your typical small-town banker. He saw the potential of America's booming economy and set up shop in London. Junius built his business on trust, connections, and ambition, becoming the go-to guy for American companies looking for investors in Europe. He was like the original transatlantic dealmaker. But Junius wasn't content with just being successful. He was building a dynasty. He had a son, John Pierpont Morgan, JP, who was about to take his father's legacy to new heights. JP wasn't just managing money, he wanted to shape the world. Junius knew his heir needed to be sharp, so he sent young JP to boarding school in Switzerland. But Switzerland wasn't all about chocolate and mountain views for JP. He worked at Duncan, Sherman & Company, a prominent New York banking firm. It was like an internship, but instead of making coffee, he was moving millions of dollars. JP thrived in this high-stakes environment, learning the ins and outs of banking. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge in a bank vault full of money. After cutting his teeth in New York, JP joined his father in London. JP wasn't there to blend in with British bankers. He was there to shake things up. Known for his bold moves and willingness to take risks, JP quickly earned a reputation as a shrewd negotiator. One story involves a shipment of rifles during the American Civil War. Some bought outdated rifles from the U.S. Army at a bargain price, hoping to resell them at a hefty profit. Most bankers wouldn't touch this deal, but JP saw an opportunity. He financed the deal, knowing the risks involved. The rifle deal was small potatoes compared to JP's next move. The American Civil War created a massive demand for gold. JP saw an opportunity to make a killing in the gold market. He formed a partnership with Charles Dabney and started trading gold. Rumors circulated that JP and his partner were manipulating the gold market. They were accused of buying up huge amounts of gold to inflate the price, and then selling it off at a massive profit. The scandal caught the attention of the U.S. Congress, who launched an investigation. JP found himself at the center of one of the biggest financial scandals of the era. But did he crack under pressure? Not a chance. JP emerged from the gold scandal a bit singed, but not broken. He'd learned that in high finance, reputation was everything. He turned his attention to the hottest industry of the time, railroads. Railroads in the late 1800s were like the dot-com boom of their day. JP realized that the real money wasn't in building railroads, it was in controlling them. He started buying up shares in struggling railroad companies, using his financial muscle to consolidate and streamline the industry. Railroads were just the beginning for JP. He had his sights set on steel. And who better to partner with than Andrew Carnegie? Carnegie was a tough nut to crack, but JP had a plan. He knew that Carnegie wanted to secure his legacy. JP approached Carnegie with an offer he couldn't refuse, a merger that would create the world's largest steel company. And thus, U.S. Steel was born. By the early 1900s, JP Morgan was more than just a banker. He was a financial force of nature. In 1907, the U.S. economy was hit by a financial panic. Banks were collapsing, The stock market was in freefall, and people were panicking. The government was powerless to stop the crisis. So, who did everyone turn to? J.P. Morgan. He summoned the titans of Wall Street to his home, locking them in his library until they agreed on a plan to save the financial system. He used his personal wealth and influence to shore up failing banks and restore confidence. The Panic of 1907 solidified J.P. Morgan's status as a legend. J.P. Morgan became the de facto central bank of the United States. He used his wealth and influence to shore up failing banks and restore confidence. He was like the financial equivalent of a first responder. The Panic of 1907 solidified J.P. Morgan's status as a legend. But his actions also raised some uncomfortable questions. Who was this unelected banker who wielded such immense power? Was he a hero, a villain, or a bit of both? When J.P. Morgan Sr. passed away in 1913, the world mourned the loss of a titan. The reins of the empire were passed to J.P. Morgan Jr., often referred to as Jack. Jack was more reserved, a strategist who preferred to work behind the scenes. Despite his more understated demeanor, Jack was no less ambitious. He inherited his father's sharp mind and instinct for deal-making. And the world, as it often does, was about to throw him a few curveballs. World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, and the Allied powers turned to J.P. Morgan & Company for financial support. World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, and the world watched in horror. The war was a financial black hole, consuming money and resources at an unprecedented rate. The Allied powers turned to J.P. Morgan & Company for financial support. Jack Morgan, despite his personal opposition to the war, found himself thrust into the role of international financier. The House of Morgan became the primary purchasing agent for the Allies, facilitating billions of dollars in loans and credits. They financed everything from weapons and ammunition to food and uniforms. The Roaring Twenties were a time of unprecedented prosperity, but the party came to a halt in 1929 with the stock market crash. The Great Depression followed, plunging the world into the deepest economic crisis in modern history. J.P. Morgan & Company was hit hard by the crash. Jack Morgan tried to steady the ship, using the bank's resources to support struggling businesses and provide loans. However, the Great Depression was a systemic crisis that exposed the weaknesses of the global financial system. Despite their efforts, the Morgans couldn't single-handedly save the world this time. The Great Depression left a scar on the American psyche. Enter the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, a full-on shakeup of the financial system. The act drew a line between commercial banking and investment banking. J.P. Morgan & Company had to make a tough choice: stick to commercial banking or enter the world of investment banking. The Morgan partners decided to split the bank. J.P. Morgan & Company would continue as a commercial bank, while Morgan Stanley would take on investment banking. The Glass-Steagall Act meant the House of Morgan had to make a tough choice. J.P. Morgan & Company would continue as a commercial bank, but a new player was about to enter the scene: Morgan Stanley. Led by J.P. Morgan's grandson, Henry Sturgis Morgan, and Harold Stanley, Morgan Stanley was ready to take on the world of investment banking. This wasn't just a friendly separation. It was a fundamental shift in the financial landscape. The old guard of relationship-based banking was giving way to a more cutthroat, transaction-oriented world. The stage was set for a new era of finance, one where deregulation, globalization, and technological innovation would reshape the industry. The casino years, high rollers, junk bonds, and the rise of greed is good. The decades after Glass-Steagall weren't a quiet retirement for the House of Morgan. J.P. Morgan and Co. and Morgan Stanley, separated at birth by government decree, faced their biggest challenge yet. By the 1970s and 80s, Wall Street looked less like a gentleman's club and more like a casino. This was the era of junk bonds, hostile takeovers, and Michael Milken. Greed, as the saying went, was good. And on Wall Street, greed was very, very good at making money. Wall Street gets a makeover, deregulation, and the return of the Titans. Now, while Morgan Stanley was busy learning the language of leverage and junk bonds, over at J.P. Morgan & Co., things were a little more buttoned up. They were still the bank that everyone called when they needed a loan to build a skyscraper or finance a merger. Think of them as the reliable older sibling. Not flashy, but always there when you needed them. But as the 1980s turned into the 90s, a funny thing happened. Remember that wall between commercial and investment banking? The one carefully erected by Glass-Steagall? Well, it started to crumble. Deregulation became the buzzword du jour, and politicians on both sides of the aisle were eager to unleash the full power of the free market. In 1999, the walls finally came tumbling down when Glass-Steagall was officially repealed. Investment banks and commercial banks were free to merge, creating financial supermarkets that could handle everything from your checking account to your wildest investment dreams. So, after all that drama, all those twists and turns, what became of the House of Morgan? Well, in a move that would have made J.P. Sr. probably spill his brandy, J.P. Morgan & Co. merged with Chase Manhattan Bank in 2000. That's right, the two titans of Wall Street, once fierce rivals, became one big happy banking family. And Morgan Stanley? They continued to thrive in the brave new world of deregulated finance, riding the waves of globalization and technological innovation. They may not have been the only game in town anymore, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. But the story of the House of Morgan isn't just about mergers and acquisitions. It's a story about the enduring power of finance, the way it shapes our world, for better or for worse. From the railroads to the internet, from the Gilded Age to the digital age, the Morgans have been there, playing their part in the grand drama of capitalism. The House of Morgan, like the financial system it helped create, is a study in contradictions. They were both architects of progress and beneficiaries of inequality, champions of stability, and sometimes agents of chaos. Their story reminds us that finance isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about power, ambition, and the constant tension between risk and reward, innovation and regulation. It's a story that continues to unfold today, long after the last top hat has been retired. So the next time you hear the name Morgan, remember, it's more than just a bank. It's a dynasty, a legacy, and a reminder that the world of finance is never quite what it seems. So there you have it, folks. The story of the House of Morgan. A century and a half of financial wheeling and dealing, of booms and busts, of triumphs and, let's face it, a few scandals along the way. They were like the first family of finance, except instead of reality TV shows, they had, actual power. We started with Junius, the patriarch who crossed the Atlantic with a dream and a whole lot of ambition. Then came J.P. Sr., the titan who tamed railroads, forged steel empires, and basically told the U.S. government, "Hold my beer, I got this," during a financial meltdown. And let's not forget Jack, the more reserved heir who navigated the chaos of two world wars and the Great Depression, proving that even in the face of global upheaval, the House of Morgan wasn't going down without a fight. You might be thinking, okay, this is all very fascinating, but what does it have to do with me? I'm just trying to figure out if I can afford avocado toast this week. But here's the thing. The decisions made by those Wall Street titans, the risks they took, They rippled outwards, shaping the economy, influencing government policies, and yes, even affecting how much that avocado toast costs. The railroads the Morgans financed connected the country, fueling industrial growth and creating jobs. The steel they helped produce built our cities, our bridges, and maybe even the phone or computer you're using to watch this right now. And even the financial crises they navigated taught us valuable lessons about the need for regulation and the importance of having a financial system that works for everyone. The story of the House of Morgan is a reminder that finance is ultimately about people. It's about the choices we make, the risks we're willing to take, and the consequences that follow. The decisions made on Wall Street continue to shape the world we live in today.